Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Dr. Jodie Skillicorn, and she's here today to share with us her new book, Healing Depression Without Medication, a psychiatrist's guide to balancing mind, body, and soul. So Jodie is an osteopathic physician, board certified in psychiatry, and a diplomat of integrative holistic medicine. She integrates conventional medical training with evidence-based holistic methods that include breathwork, meditation, yoga, mindfulness-based cognition therapy, EMDR, emotional freedom techniques, mind-body medicine, energy medicine, nutrition, exercise, and acupuncture at her private practice. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Jodie Skillicorn.
Thanks for having me.
You know, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. And my goodness, I mean, no matter where we are, I think everyone can really learn something from this book.
I hope so.
Well, why don't you share with us the inspiration behind writing this book?
Sure. So really, it's just listening to my patients' stories and my own frustration at hearing the same story over and over and over again. And basically what I keep hearing is how people have gotten started on medications largely, not always, but largely because of just very normal emotional responses to losses, to stressors, to challenges, to traumas. Just as an example, I had one woman come see me once, and she hadn't seen a doctor in years because she had been afraid because she had gone in her 20s to see just a regular checkup with her PCP. And the doctor walked in the door and asked how she was doing, and she burst into tears. And he immediately just pulled out a script and handed her a script for an antidepressant. And she compliantly went to the pharmacy, picked it up, and it was only when she was driving home from the pharmacy that she realized, that was crazy. He hadn't asked her any questions, just nothing. He just handed her the script because she cried. And if he'd had asked her questions, he would have found out that she was in the middle of the last 2 weeks of graduate school. She was about to be married in 2 weeks, and she was moving in a few weeks, and she was just overwhelmed, and no one had asked her the question, and she just didn't even realize all that emotion was there. But she was one of the lucky ones, right? Most of the people I see end up getting on meds, and for very similar reasons, right? For having an emotional response to, again, getting a diagnosis of cancer or losing a loved one, or right, just things that we all experience and we all respond to. But in a 10-minute session with a doctor, whether it's your primary care physician or a psychiatrist, there's not much time to get to what's going on and what's happening. And, so now 1 out of 4 women are on these medications, 1 out of 7, 1 out of 6, depending on which study you look at, Americans. And often it's just for, very normal responses to life. And so I wrote this really just to show that there's other ways to get through depression and anxiety for most people most of the time.
Yeah. I understand that. I went through a loss. I was really upset. As at the same time I was going to go see my doctor for a physical, and the scripts were flying. I was just like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah, I think it's often the doctor's discomfort and not knowing what to do and having so little time and not wanting to open up a can of worms to kind of see what's going on and just listen. And then, there's other people I see who have been on these medications for years, decades, a lifetime, and are terrified to come off. They don't, because they've been relying on them so long, and yet they're still depressed or still anxious. They feel more miserable than they did when they started, but they're terrified to let go of it, or they're having side effects and need to. And so they realize that things really have to shift and they have to find another way. But it really is amazing how big a problem it is, and how few options are just kind of out there generally that are evidence-based that really can help people get through and to get off meds for those that are on them. Again, not for everyone, but um, you know, for lots of people, there's lots of other ways.
Yeah, I mean, if we have physicians that are so easily handing out these scripts without really kind of diving into what's happening in a person's life, or maybe if there's a real need for it, because I've had it happen to me personally, and I was shocked,
Yeah.
and so to not really, and the doctor did the same thing, not really asking a lot of questions, but all of a sudden it's just like, oh, you need a medication. It's like, I probably just need to grieve.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Hmm. Yeah.
And what's
It's
worse is these medications, if they were safe, maybe it wouldn't be such a big deal, but there really are a lot of potential side effects. And one of the biggest is that actually when people start them over time, it actually makes the problem worse. So study after study has shown um, that those who go on them, regardless of severity of depression, who stay on them the longest, fare the worse in the long run, because it really starts to mess up with our body's own ability to kind of find balance. And also, it just disempowers people when we're told that we're, a victim of our genetics, a victim of a broken brain, of imbalanced neurochemistry, and people don't feel like they have any other choice.
Well, you touched on a whole lot that I want to talk about.
Sure.
So, and that's some of the things that's really interesting when we look at this. What are some of the common myths about depression that you encounter in your work?
So the biggest myth is that, well, one, that it's a thing, that, right, this checklist of symptoms has one common denominator, one common root cause. And then the other myth is that root cause is a neurochemical imbalance. And in fact, there's been 50 years of research, and to date, there's no evidence that that's the case, and there's tons of evidence to refute it. But it's become really hard to override that message because there's so much money in stake, um, and and so there just isn't a whole lot of research, and showing, looking at other possibilities, and the research that is out there just doesn't get published in the same places. But what the research is suggesting is that really, like all other chronic diseases, depression seems to stem not from a neurochemical imbalance. And in fact, the studies that have been done on that have shown that basically a quarter of people with depression have low serotonin, but a quarter of people that have never had of depression also have low serotonin. Likewise, a quarter with depression and a quarter without depression have high serotonin, and the rest are in the middle. And so what this implies, right, obviously, is that there really is no normal. There's so many other factors. So if it's not that, the question is, well, what is it? And I don't think there's any one thing, and no one has a definitive answer. But what a lot of the research is showing is that it's very much related to inflammation and chronic stress, just like no different than diabetes and heart disease and all of these other diseases that we're finding are now related to inflammation as well. And for depression, actually, and all these other chronic diseases, one of the biggest contributors is early life stress. So what's called adverse childhood events, the ACEs. And these could be things like actual abuse, sexual, physical, or emotional abuse. It could be having a parent that's just not present, either because they have their own mental health issues or because of an addiction, or just simply because of divorce, or they're just not around, or they're in prison, or whatever. And so there's all these traumas that can happen as a child. And these affect the structure and the function of the brain so that we're more on guard, more vigilant all the time, and the nervous system is more ramped up, always looking for something to kind of go wrong, because that's what your early childhood experience is, that the world's not really safe. And based on that, you sort of see yourself in a different way, and it affects how you see the world, it affects how you see yourself, it affects how you see others around you, which then changes behaviors, right? We're less likely to we know how to take care of ourselves or soothe ourselves if we haven't really had the experience of being soothed. So it influences us in so many different ways, and then those go on and increase dramatically the risk for other chronic diseases down the road, both physical and emotional. So just for example, with depression, if you have someone does not have any of these childhood events, and these are just the ones that are listed in the studies, there's still lots more that show up and can be there. So this isn't exactly accurate, but if none of the primary ones, there's about a 12%, 12 to 15% of having depression. But if someone has one history of one of these events, it now is about 25%. And by the time you have 4 or more of these events, goes up to about over 400%. And the risk of suicidality goes up 1,200%. And at the same time, the risk of diabetes and coronary artery disease and cancer also double. So this correlation between these events and these traumas and these losses is huge. And these events can't be healed, right, with a biochemical solution, right? They're soul wounds, and they need to be acknowledged and listened to and worked through, not just numbed and ignored.
Do you find that that's what happens most of the time, that numbing and ignoring?
Yeah, well, I think that's what happens, when you're a child, right? If there's something going on, say, for example, a parent is an alcoholic or abusive, right? It's often hidden, right? It's kind of buried under the rug and no one's really talks about it. And then you go to your doctor and your body's expressing it, whether it's physically or emotionally. And then you get handed a pill. And so basically you're being kind of told the same thing. You're being sort of re-victimized and told to kind of just bury it, shove it down. It doesn't, it's a problem. You're the problem. There's something wrong with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And, why don't you share with us, when you're working with someone that has depression, what does that look like? What's that process?
Yeah. So the first thing I do is take the time, right? Which other doctors would do, I think, if they had time, but it's just not part of the system. So I'm outside of the system. So I have sort of this privilege. I get to spend time with people. So time to really hear their story and to kind of see those roots and just kind of, and then after spending time with them and hearing that, to reframe it so that they're not a victim, but in reality, their symptoms make a whole lot of sense given their circumstances. And that even some of their symptoms may have been ways to cope and ways to get through when they were a child and had no other options, right? And now, of course, as an adult, it may be harming them, but right, it had a purpose. It's not just something's wrong with you, but rather, this person was trying to figure out a way to cope. So kind of reframing it so that the person's no longer the victim, but rather, okay, this totally makes sense given what you experienced. And just acknowledging and saying it out loud and being heard is the first step, I think, in healing anything.
So, with all the information that we've been talking about and how you work with people, how do you get to the root cause of what's really going on with somebody?
Yeah, so again, that's listening to their stories and really taking the time and kind of going back and really exploring when the symptoms first started and what was going on then. And, not just getting the list of symptoms. And from that, again, reframing the story to show the person that the person's not a victim, but rather their response makes perfect sense. And then, sometimes it is more recent stuff. It's not always from the past. And so, looking at lab work as well and physical physical issues and how those relate and what's going on in their life and all of these things and exposures to various toxins. And sometimes those toxins could be outside in the environment, right? The pesticides in the food we eat or processed food itself or pesticides in our lawns or toxins that we're sensitive to that we're putting on our skin or whatever, but also toxins in our head, right? Toxins, our own thoughts, our own negativity, our own self-criticism, our own self-judgment is also incredibly toxic. Or even right now in the midst of, right, the coronavirus, and there's so much fear and we're all susceptible to it. It's everywhere. Every news article, every social media post, right? It's all fear, fear, fear. Um, and in the reality, though, I don't know about everyone listening, but right here in this moment, I'm just sitting in my office talking to you, and I'm safe, right? But my mind can get lost in all these stories about what might happen or what could happen or what I'm going to do with having my kids home for the next 3 months and how I'm going to get my work done and how, like, what that financially is going to affect, right? All these stories we can start to tell, and yet none of that's happening right now, right? But when our brains get caught up in these stories, our body responds as if it is happening, right? Our body responds to our thoughts as much as reality. So by having those thoughts, now the cortisol is getting amped up, my nervous system's getting amped up, right? Then my body starts to get tight, my breath starts to get tight, and that sends a message to my brain that there's a threat. And in reality, right, again, nothing is happening right here, right now. So
That's
it's
a
easy to
really,
get lost in that spiral.
and a lot of us do. We get stuck in the stress factor
Yes.
where, yeah, of course there is some stress that goes with this and what with the current crisis that we're having right now. But, if we're sheltering at home or if we're taking precautions and we still carry this level of stress, I mean, that really affects us, doesn't it?
It does. And now what are we doing? We're actually depleting our immune system so that we're less able to, do what we need to do if we are exposed. So the idea is to really focus on what we have control over at any given moment rather than all these stories that spin around in our head over and over about what could go wrong or the things that did go wrong in the past, but just taking control. So again, the coronavirus is an example just because it's everywhere, right? We have control over where we go or where we don't go. We have control over washing our hands or not washing our hands. We have control over what we're putting in our bodies as far as healthy food to support our immune system. And we have control over what thoughts we're going to stay focused on. We don't get to choose that the scary ones pop in. That's inevitable. And we don't want to beat ourselves up for that because we can't control it. But we can then choose to not stay there and keep spinning around in that negative story and all that panic. We can focus somewhere else and focus on what's right here, right now, what's okay right now, focus on what we're grateful for right now. So we
Yeah.
always have that power to choose.
That's so important, especially when we look at, because I know you have recommendations for people who suffer from depression or maybe they have a history of depression, ways that they can go about, kind of making sure that they don't have a relapse or get into a spot where they kind of start feeling stuck.
Yeah. So part of that again is really starting to notice our thoughts as thoughts and not stories. Another piece to that, an important piece, is starting to notice our body and our breath. So even in this moment, so right, kind of checking in and noticing, right, if we're breathing into the chest or into the belly. So when we breathe into the chest, we're actually sending a message to that the part of the brain, which is the fight, flight, freeze, and where all our fear responses and our threat detector is. And when we breathe shallow breaths into the chest, it sends a message to that part of the brain that there's a threat. So even if I'm sitting on my couch watching TV, but I'm taking short breaths, right, I'm sending this message. And so that my brain then is trying to figure out, well, what's wrong, even though actually nothing in this moment is wrong. But that's the message it's getting. So then it tries to figure it out. And then it sort of creates a story to explain what's wrong. And it starts to look for things and things that were neutral suddenly seem more threatening when we're in that state. And so one simple way to pull out is to start to focus on breathing into the belly. And when we do that, when we take slower, deeper breaths into the belly, we send a message to a nerve, the vagus nerve, which winds its way up to that limbic part of the brain, and basically sends a safety alert, like it's okay, we can relax, we don't have to be on guard right now. And it's only in that place where we can kind of relax and let go a little bit that the parasympathetic system, the rest, digest, and basically heal part of the system can get activated. And that's when our body, right, we can support our immune system. That's when we can heal and rejuvenate. But if we're always in that stressed out place, always waiting for the next threat, always waiting for the worst case scenario, we never really get a chance to get there. So then we're more vulnerable.
Well, and I love how that all comes together and we can get into this place of mindfulness. What if somebody has like their mind just wanders all the time and they can't even focus?
Well, isn't that most of us?
It sure is.
I mean, my mind wanders all the time. You can ask my kids. Like, I'm always confusing. I'm always calling my son my dog's name and my dog my daughter's name. And when I'm not focused, right, we're scattered. And so it really is training the brain, no different than if you were going to go out and run, a 5K, you wouldn't do it without having trained a little bit first, hopefully. Right. And so when you first go out, your muscles may feel weak if you haven't exercised in a long time or decades. Right. And each time you exercise, you start to build up a little more strength. And it's the same with mindfulness. Right. We just start to just train our mind so that it's always going to go off. It's what our brains do. That's just part of being human. But we can train it to come back at least when we and become aware when it's off and spinning so that we can then kind of pull back, whether it's to the breath or whether it's just to feeling, so right now I'm sitting in a chair, feeling myself sitting in this chair, feeling the weight of my body on the chair, feeling my hands touching the armrest, right? Just coming back into this moment kind of stops that bouncing. And the more often we practice it, the easier it is to get there. And the longer we can stay, but we're always going to keep bouncing.
I love that. I love that. Yes, you're so right. I mean, how often do we all kind of get to this place where it's kind of like, gosh, I can't keep track of my mind, things
Yeah.
are just kind of going. And I think for a lot of times people and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that when someone's suffering from depression, they're having a hard time getting out of bed and going,
Yes.
gosh, I can't focus. I can't even think about getting out of bed. It
Yeah.
seems so overwhelming.
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, if you can just break it down to simple things. So just the breath. So just, seeing if you can get to a count of 10 by focusing on the belly moving in and the moving out, right? So keeping it small and simple. If that's where you're at, you have to start small or else it does become overwhelming and then you just quit. Um, or just for that person that can't get out of bed, maybe the goal is just to get to to walk to the bottom of the driveway that day, just to get outside, step outside the door, right? And then you start there. So you have to start where you're at. But there's always ways to slowly make steps forwards. Just staying in bed isn't gonna, right? Isn't gonna change anything. And
Yeah.
so it is gonna take an initial act of willpower to make that first step. But that first step is always the hardest too, right? I think anyone who's stopped exercising for a period of time knows how hard it is just to get your tennis shoes back on and get out the door and start again after you've been sick or after you've taken a break for whatever reason. But once you make that first step, it's easier and easier um, to keep going with it. It's like a ripple, right? Each action, each step you take, it kind of reverberates out and has an amplifying effects. But it also makes it easier and easier each time.
Well, Dina, I know we've covered a lot, and one of the things I'd love for you to share with us is what are some of the misconceptions people have about depression and mental illness?
So again, that it's a pathology, that it's a neurochemical imbalance, that these people are weak and broken. When I would argue, um, in some ways, these people are incredibly resilient because they've already survived. Often, not always, a lot of stress and right, they're still here, they're still coping, they're still trying, um, and I think actually one of the biggest misconceptions that's just coming into my head now is that by bringing it up, that by talking to people, that by asking about what happened rather than what's wrong, but what happened, that will stir things up and disrupt the person. But there's actually lots of research suggesting that it's healing to do that, right? We don't have to tiptoe around, and that being upfront and asking questions and being curious in and of itself can be healing. Um, and so we don't have to be afraid of it. And again, right, it's so much a part of our normal human experience. I doubt there's any one of us who have pushed to a point with enough, right? I think we all have our own Achilles heel, but have pushed far enough and stressed enough that we wouldn't have, these symptoms in whatever form, right? It just makes sense. There's only so much we can cope with, and especially if we don't have support. And so I don't think it's abnormal. I just think it's part of, sort of a line of, of just, lesser and greater symptoms, but I think we all have these. Even psychosis, which I don't talk about in my book, but even, right, there's lots of studies now showing that, like, having even sort of thoughts in our head that don't sound like our own, or some of these psychotic experiences, lots of people have, actually. It's just we're not scared of them, and we just are like, oh, that's strange, and we let it go. But the more fear then you put around it, same with depression, the more fear there is of having this thing, then the worse it gets. I think of it like a pot of boiling water, right? So I tell this to my patients all the time. So if you put the lid on, right, and again, try to avoid the feelings, or run away from them, or think they're bad and you shouldn't have them, and so you put the lid on real tight, right, what happens? It's eventually those emotions, that water, it's going to spill out the side in some unexpected, at some unexpected time, in some unexpected way, and it'll seem like it's for no particular reason, because it doesn't. It's been building pressure for a long time, and then all of a sudden it's just exploding, and it doesn't seem to make sense. But the pressure's been building for a long time. And so if we can learn to take the lid off and just be curious and look, whether it's for ourselves or for others, right, it just kind of, the water then can settle and soften. Those emotions can settle and soften.
I think that's a great analogy, because how often do we get kind of stuck, and we kind of bottle things up and like, well, I don't want to deal with this, or
Yeah.
or subconsciously or consciously.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of what I think having a daily routine of checking in with the breath, checking in with the body, noticing where we're holding tightness, noticing what emotions are kind of brewing there, so that we can clear it out before it gets so big that it's harder to deal with, and we are the person stuck in bed and can't get out, right? But if we can tend to it, on a daily basis, right, we can kind of clear out some of that residue, just like cleaning house. If we didn't clean house for a year, it would be a really big disaster, and I couldn't even imagine starting. Right? It would just be too big to conquer.
It'd be a hot mess is what it would be.
Yeah, it would be really bad.
But that makes a lot of sense when we look at it that way. It's like, hey, I need to do my own personal house cleaning.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
in different areas of my life, and our mental state is definitely a strong place where we need to do house cleaning.
Absolutely. Yeah. And our physical, because you can't really separate them, right? Our physical body, the health of our physical body influences our emotional state, and vice versa. So again, the food we eat influences not only our physical health, but there's a direct connection between our gut and our brain, and the balance of the microbiome in our gut and the balance of our brain. It's all connected. Likewise, when we don't exercise, right, that in itself doubles our risk of depression. But there's decades now of research showing that exercise is as powerful or more powerful than any antidepressant that exists. It works both to prevent and to heal depression. So again, showing the physical and the emotional, they're all tied together. We can't really separate them.
So as we are going through this difficult time, it's a very unique time in our history. What are some ways that people can make sure that they curb, depression, or feeling that they're getting to a place of hopelessness, either with exercise or activities at home?
Yeah. So yeah, it's so important right now. It is such a crazy time. But it's all the same. So again, um, really noticing the breath and doing whatever you can to calm the nervous system. Recognizing thoughts as stories, not facts. So really being clear what's happening right now versus getting caught up in all the drama in the newspaper and the media. And even I would encourage people to turn it off. Like, take a few minutes every day so you know what's happening and if there's, changes in your state or your area. But really you can't just keep focusing on it because it ramps up our nervous systems. I mean, I can feel mine get amped up every time I go to see what the latest news is.
Oh boy. Yeah, I get that.
It's inevitable, right? And then not to
goodness.
freak out that your body is doing that because that's just a normal response. But then, okay, what can I do to counteract that? So yes, getting outside, and especially if you can get to a park, right? That's one place that we are even, right, everyone's allowed to go to the park, maybe not in San Francisco right now, but right, to get outside, to get fresh air. Nature in itself is healing, right? It's shown that just 15 minutes of exposure to green can improve our immune system and improve our mood for up to a month. Right. So it's so important, even if it's just getting out on your back porch or, a stoop or opening your window and sticking your head out. And if you don't have access to something right at your house, just pictures of nature or sounds of nature can be healing. And nurturing yourself with healthy food, right, to help balance your immune system. And even right now, some supplements I think can be useful, like vitamin D, making sure you've got good levels of that, making, multivitamin. And right now since the virus, I'm a big fan of elderberry. I make all my kids drink it every day right now. So that, and then just being kind to ourselves when we do get anxious, right? Not judging ourselves for it, but just offering kindness. So I think of it like, I often tell my patients, if you imagine, because some people can't even imagine what that looks like, but if I think we've all seen like kids playing on a playground, and there's that kid that falls. And there's sort of 3 different responses from parents. And one is to kind of go over and sort of like, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? And now the kid's crying even harder because they're just being barraged with questions and their hurt isn't being tended to. And then there's the parent who goes over and is just like, basically yells at the kid, like, just get over it. It's no big deal. You just got a little scrape, brush it off. Right. So, and then there's the parent that just goes over, gives a little kiss to the knee, and then the kid just gets up and runs back and starts playing. And so it's kind of offering that to ourselves, just that little kiss to the knee, that little hug that just like, it's okay. I'm okay. And it's okay that I'm feeling stressed, and it's okay that I'm feeling sad, but really I'm okay right now. And I don't have to stay in this space.
That's so important. And I think as we move through this together, hearing that kind of information where it's like our responses to things really makes a difference, how we show up, taking care of ourselves. If we can get outside to a park, hey, great, go for a walk. Maybe I'll walk around the block. And if not, just see about doing mindfulness activities at home.
Yeah. Or again, even just sticking a picture of nature, on your computer screen, or, listening to sounds that are so easy now with YouTube of a babbling brook, or just something to like, those are things that actually, they calm our nervous system just inherently. We're meant to be connected with nature and the world around us. And so those sounds are just really soothing for most of us.
I'm pretty sure that I've even seen, they'll have like, like a whole kind of a movie reel of that on like Amazon where you could just play it and it's like Hawaii and the beaches.
Yeah.
Birds in the background or whatever the case is.
Exactly. Actually, my daughter, they had their first day of just figuring out how to get online for school today. And the teacher had a beach in Florida in the background. She's like, since we can't go to Florida.
I love it, but that's great because, using that creativity and kind of thinking of other ways outside the box is really what's going to get us through this.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And being creative about it and turning it into switching it from what, from being victims to, okay, wait, is there some way we can turn this around and make this a positive?
Yeah.
I know even for us, so I'm so used to driving my kids around from place to place and play dates. And it was the quietest weekend we've had in months. And it was actually really nice. And even my daughter was like, it was really nice. We just got to spend time together, because we're always driving from place to place. And we've never spent it's been a long time since we spent a whole weekend just together with no one else and nothing to do. And so I think there's pros, there's a way to reframe how we see all this for all of us.
I love that. Well, and so, my goodness, I mean, we could talk forever. I mean, I found your book, Healing Depression Without Medication, was really a great resource and very helpful. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your book?
So I have a website at jodieskillicorn.com, and I'm on Instagram, also Jodie Skillicorn, and on Facebook at Jodie Skillicorn, and also Mindful Psychiatry is actually where I have most of my posts right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I know that, I mean, because we're all kind of being super cautious, in regards to our connections right now. I know your book's available on Kindle. It's at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I mean, it's all over the place I'm kind of old school, so I probably will hold on to books for a while before I start using Kindle. So I get it. But I'm seriously considering it because you know what? I want to make sure other people around me are safe too,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the other beautiful thing is, right, as we center ourselves and are less caught up in the drama, we can help other people center too. Mm-hmm. It's a way to have some power in all this, right? It's a way to shift that sense of panic and fear by just focusing on how we can shift out of it for ourselves so that that influences those around us.
Well, it gives us the opportunity to really show up in a different way. I mean,
yes.
This is going to be tough for everybody. I mean, now we get to determine, is this going to be, as pleasant as an experience as we could possibly make it? I know that's kind of a stretch, but in many ways it's just that, what it's going to be, or is it something that we're going to just be in fear all the time about,
Right. And we get to choose, we kind of get to choose. Again, another story I like to tell is the story of the two wolves. My patients have probably heard this way too many times, but I love this story. And it's the story of the grandfather. He's talking to his grandson, and he's telling him in Native American tradition of the idea of the two wolves. So there's the sort of big bad wolf full of fear and hate. And then there's the good wolf that's full of love and compassion and kindness and hope. And the little boy says to his grandpa, well, which one wins? And the grandpa says, it's whichever one you feed. And so literally day to day, minute to minute, we get to choose which wolf we're going to feed. Are we going to feed the wolf of hope and look for opportunity even in crisis? Or are we going to feed the wolf of fear and just kind of keep going down that path, which just never ends well for anyone? And then what's most important and most empowering is which one we choose, that influences how our brain changes based on those decisions. Our brain changes with every thought and every action of every minute of every day. And so we have the choice to rewire our brains and step out of the fear if we can keep feeding that wolf of hope. And it's a process, not an endpoint, right? It's one we all have to keep working towards, especially when the whole world's kind of in a state of upheaval.
Yeah, real difficulty. Well, Jodie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today. I mean, I just felt your book and the time we spent together is just so helpful.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Well, Jodie, it's been such an honor to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your new book, Healing Depression Without Medication. Healing Depression Without Medication is available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and of course you can get that on Kindle. Again, if you'd like to reach out to Dr. Jodie Skillicorn, you can at her website, mindfulpsych.com, for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just what moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Friday and Saturday at 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.